live stream. I'm Janice Cole, and welcome to tonight's episode of What is Janice Going to Do This Time? I am looking at my festival playlist in Forza Horizon 4, and I kind of feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff and looking over it and being terrified, because right now, last night at about, after my live cast actually, I checked my email. I should check my email more often. The company that owns the trailer park in which I live, or I should say mobile home park, has been sold. So now I am standing on the edge of the cliff and hoping that it's not going to crumble underneath my feet. I am worried about whether my rent is going to go up, by how much. My Social Security check will only go so far. I'm already paying half of it for my rent. And my daughter, who is 30, has been job hunting for 6 months without success. And I mean, she goes on all the sites every day, checks out job openings. She is doing everything she can to get a job. She is sending off lots of applications, and nobody is emailing her back. We are white-knuckle terrified of being homeless. Now, this is a broadcast about handicaps. Well, a large majority of people on the streets, homeless, are handicapped. A lot of veterans are handicapped and out in the street. I watched a documentary called United States of Tents the other night. It's on Amazon Prime if you have it. I strongly suggest you watch it. It was made in 2018, so just 2 years ago, before COVID, before the housing crisis that left a lot of people evicted. The way they count the homeless is a crock. Basically, they have one night every year that they go out and they try to find homeless people where they're hiding and do a head count, which doesn't really tell them anything. They miss a lot of the people on the street. Of the people they counted, about half of them have jobs. They go to work every day. This may surprise you. And yet, they can't afford an apartment or to rent a house or to rent a trailer, and they are literally living in their cars or living in a tent city, and they can't afford a place to live. 70%, this is a figure from 2018, 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. I am one of them. I live off Social Security disability, which converted to regular Social Security when I turned 62 in September of last year. I'm scared. Ever since I got my disability at age 40, I've been afraid of losing it, because a lot of people, somebody will say, oh, they're faking. They don't need Social Security. So a lot of people have lost their apartments and gone homeless because their check just suddenly cuts off. I've been terrified of that ever since 2003, when I won my disability case, and it took 4 years with a lawyer to get it. Disability is something that is not fair in this country. You think all of your working life, oh, if I get disabled, I'll be able to draw Social Security disability. It's not that simple. You apply for Social Security disability, and everybody's very nice to you, and you go in. Well, you used to go in the office. Now you apply online, and 90% of people are turned down the first time. Some give up at that point and say, "Oh, I guess I'm not going to get it, and I just have to deal with trying to work with this disability that it's really, it's very, very hard." And then you can ask for a reconsideration. That's half of people get accepted for disability after that. Half are turned down. Then the third step, the reconsideration, is when they go through your existing file, all the medical evidence and everything, and they have a different doctor look at it, basically. The third step is to get a lawyer. There are a lot of Social Security lawyers that will take you on contingency. That is, you don't pay unless you win the case. And I found a lawyer who was very good. And as a matter of fact, the day of my hearing, my lawyer was deathly pale and sick with the flu. And yet he came and he was there with me at my hearing. And I won my case, but the things they said, there was a committee. There were doctors, there were other professionals, there were some people that did the telelink, and this was 2003, so there were several virtual people on the committee. And they talked as if I wasn't there, and they talked about me in very derogatory terms. I left there crying, even though I won the case. And my lawyer said to me, "Don't worry, a lot of people react this way." And psychologically, it's a blow, because it's like the final yes that you are disabled and you have to face the truth, because it's a grief. It has stages. The first stage is denial. It's like, no, this isn't happening. It's just too much to take. And then there's the anger, then there's the depression, and then there's finally the acceptance. And you may move back and forth between those stages of grief. I've talked about this before on my live cast, but I'm going through that right now. I'm kind of going through denial. This can't be happening. 3 years ago I went through this in the same trailer park. It changed hands, and I had the same uncertainty. And the new manager actually went up on the rent, and I had to move out. And I'm terrified of that happening again. History does repeat itself, doesn't it? So I am really upset tonight, but I am here with you, and I'm going to be talking about disability, homelessness, and other things that are on my mind. So just giving you a heads up, I'm very upset. And it's nobody's fault. It's just the way life is for a handicapped person. I have spent a lot of my life, I think I'll do Calm Before the Hurricane with a team. Why not? It is difficult to be handicapped. It is very difficult to decide to apply for disability. I had a nurse practitioner who said, you really ought to consider disability. And it's like, disability, I can work. And she says, yeah, and look at how much time you're missing from work. And look at, how much stress you're under. You really can't continue like this. You need to apply for disability and just accept it. And by the way, get a wheelchair. And the doctor that she was working with, I saw him, and he refused to write an order for a wheelchair. He says, "You've got fibromyalgia, you're not handicapped." So in the medical community, there is division about what constitutes a handicap as far as Social Security disability. And as a handicapped person in that situation, you are pulled back and forth. It's like, well, am I disabled or am I not disabled? And it goes on. My car is not figure this out. No, I don't want to turn off the controller. I want to go. Well, let me just start this process over. I'm trying to move the car and it's not moving. This is weird. Let me try changing cars. This is so weird. This game feels about as paralyzed as I feel right now. The terror, the just anxiety. I went to the doctor today to renew my prescriptions, and I was telling her, I was talking to the, yes, I do. I was telling the nurse assistant about my anxiety and all, and she says, "Your heart rate is 110. I mean, yep, because it's that anxiety. I've been like that all day long. So there are physical symptoms to anxiety. When you're scared, your heartbeat goes up. And my car is still not moving. This is bad. I can usually move around before the matchmaking starts for the event. This is really... The wheels are turning, but I'm not moving. This is... And it's me not pulling on the accelerator. That's how nervous and upset I am. Forgetting ridiculous things like how to play my game. Okay, so that's human error. GrannyHandicap is scared to death of being homeless. So, I'm even forgetting how to play my game because I am so nervous and upset. It's a fear that I've been through many times before. When you're a renter, you never know when the rent's going to go too high and you can't stay in your apartment. I have had to squeeze into very small apartments. I have had to change my address I don't know how many times. I was talking with my care aide today, and I was listing off all the places I've lived in my life just since Maggie has been with me, my younger daughter, Sasse Marie. And, here I am. We were moving every 6 months when she was 5. And it never ends. Either there's somebody doing drugs next door, there's gang activity. I've lived in gang neighborhoods. I can tell you a lot about that. Being out after sunset is no, I'll give you a hint. In Salt Lake City, of all places. But the kind of places I can afford are usually in those zip codes with high crime and obvious gang activity. Although gang activity is something I could talk about for a long time because it's in your neighborhood, wherever you live. There is gang activity probably in every city, suburb, neighborhood. You know, it's pervasive and it spreads like cancer. And the thing is, it involves a lot of crime against handicapped people. A lot of gangs have it in for handicapped people. I debated for years whether to get a handicap tag because I was afraid to park anywhere, frankly, because of all of the crime against handicapped people. And that's something you don't think about, but that's a type of very pervasive discrimination. When you've got, when you put a handicap tag on your car, you are basically painting a target on it. So, yeah, there are things about being handicapped that you wouldn't think about. You wouldn't think that that would be an issue. But definitely, I mean, there are people who go around stealing wheelchairs, damaging wheelchairs, and when you consider disability equipment, it's very easy to damage. Consider a bicycle and how fragile they are. It's very easy to bend a wheel on a bicycle so that it's not true. I used to love riding my bicycle, and I couldn't ride it very far, but I loved it. And I learned a little bit about how to change a tire. That's hard. If you're talking the rear wheel, I couldn't change that. I could change the front tire, but I could not change the rear one. A manual wheelchair is very much like a bicycle, and the maintenance is much the same. Greasing the parts and, just the tires, if you have tires that have to have air in them. I prefer the solid tires because you don't have to worry about having a flat and having to change tires like I used to do on my bicycle. So if you have a wheelchair, if you have a choice about what kind of tires to put on your wheelchair, power chair, or manual chair, put solid tires. Hands down, that is the easiest way to go on your wheelchair. And when I had a power chair, I had solid tires. I did not have tires that you had to put air in because it just makes sense. If you're a mile from home in your power chair, you don't want to have a flat tire. Oh, I remember one time we lived in Gainesville, Georgia. I had a power chair that stopped working. And so I had to get out of the chair and get down on the ground. And believe me, if I get down on the ground, it takes just about 2 people to lift me up because I can't get up. But yet I had to get on the ground to get under the wheelchair to make sure everything was plugged in properly, and it was a loose wire. So it was easy to fix, but it wasn't easy to get down on the ground. And then luckily we found these, there were a couple of Hispanic guys who came by and they asked me if I needed help, and they barely spoke English, but they picked me up. And I will always be grateful because, there I was. Once I got down, I couldn't get back up. My daughter would have had to call an ambulance to get me up. And I couldn't have afforded the bill, So there are a lot of things about being handicapped that maybe people don't think about who aren't handicapped, but you go through stuff. And the worst part of it is trying to find a place that is halfway handicapped accessible. Now, my unit is not handicapped accessible at all. But I do have a ramp. I own the ramp. So when I leave, I will take it with me. It's an aluminum ramp, and it's rather complicated, but folks from my church were able to put it up for me. It's missing some parts, so it's a little steeper than it should be. It should be 5-degree slope, no more. And they said, oh, it's no big deal. You can get up and down it. They're not handicapped. Plus their souls, they aren't handicapped. They don't know how hard it is for me to get up that ramp. But, you know, if you are needing to put a ramp on your house, I would suggest to you that, yeah, aluminum ramps are expensive, but they are no maintenance. You put a wooden ramp, and you're going to be rebuilding that wooden ramp every few years. And ramps are a big deal. They have to be a low enough slope so you can get up and down them. For example, if it's wet, you need to be able to get, getting up a wet ramp is very difficult in a wheelchair. So there are considerations that somebody who's not handicapped, oh, it's no big deal. Well, if you're in a wheelchair, it's a big deal. So the trials of looking for an apartment when you are handicapped, it's a big deal, because you go to an apartment complex, they say, oh, all our units are handicapped accessible. It's a blatant, outright lie. No apartment is handicapped accessible unless it has a ramp with a slope of 5 degrees or less. And if it has, there are 3 features to a handicapped apartment that are stipulated under HUD. First thing is an entryway that, it doesn't have to have, if you've got 2 doors, one of them needs to be accessible. So you should have either a flat entry or an entry that a ramp can be put on. In the case of my so-called handicapped accessible apartment, I had to buy a ramp for a 3-inch rise. Now, you might think, oh, okay, ramp, a tiny little ramp that you can lift, that's no big deal, right? It cost $125, and no agency will buy it for you. You have to buy that out of pocket. And just trying to get a wheelchair nowadays, you basically have to be dying to get a power wheelchair. I cannot get one with my Medicaid. It's ridiculous. I went to a physical therapist and he evaluated me. It was very physically uncomfortable. He had me stand and see how long I could stand for. Let me tell you, when I stand up, I get dizzy. I start feeling very anxious because my pain goes up. I feel sick at my stomach. And it goes on until I start feeling like I'm going to pass out. Okay? I have about 30 seconds on my feet. If I'm walking, I can last a little bit longer. But if I'm standing in one place, pretty much 30 seconds is all I have before I start getting panicky and feeling like I'm going to absolutely pass out on the floor. So, here's this physical therapist. He's having me do these exercises. He's having me stand up and sit down multiple times. This is painful. And he's telling me, well, I don't think they're going to give you a wheelchair, and, you know, it has to go to a committee and all this stuff. And it's like, you know, my first power chair I bought myself because I won my disability case. It was $7,000 and I paid cash for it. I never dreamed that 13 years later, when it quit on me, it didn't actually quit. The tires got bald and I couldn't afford to replace them. And very few places, you know, I lived in Gainesville, Georgia when I got the power chair. And of course we moved several times and ended up here in Ringgold, Georgia. Well, there's no company that's, the company I bought it from is in Gainesville. It's not in Ringgold. So I would have had to have taken the chair to Gainesville. That's like 2 or 3 hours on the road. It's not possible to get the tires changed. They pretty much won't touch a chair that you bought someplace else. It's crazy. There ought to be a law, right? So, you know, I had no choice but to just let the chair go to charity. And I thought, well, I'll just get another one. Surely Medicaid will buy me one. Well, I went through all this with the physical therapist, and my doctor would not sign the form. And she said, it is not that I don't think you need a wheelchair, but the way Medicaid is now, they will not give it to you unless you absolutely are paralyzed or dying. And I'm thinking, why? And it's a lot of work on the doctor's part. It's not an easy thing for them to do either. So I'm sympathetic to that, and I love my doctor. But it's just, you know, I went through all that with the physical therapist for nothing. All that physical suffering. It's like, so it's really basically when you are disabled, you're just, I don't think this is going to match make. I don't think this is going to match make. I think I'm going to start over. But it's just hard for me to take all this in. You know, here we are in this boat again that we have been through many, many times. You know, the possibility that the rent goes up. If the rent goes up, I can't pay it. If the, and where would we go? I was looking in some of the, one of my favorite places to look for rentals is Zillow.com, because they have a lot of rentals that, you know, Apartments.com, forget it. All their apartments are going to be too expensive for me. They don't have low-income apartments. And you might say, well, what about public housing? What about those, what do they call it? If you go on HUD.gov, there are a couple of categories of public assistance housing. Section 8 is pretty much dead. I mean, if you've already got it, you can use it, but trying to get Section 8, it's a program to help you pay for just a regular apartment. They won't help you with the mobile home, which doesn't make sense to me, because mobile homes are the cheapest place to live. They're usually on the poorest land. they're usually in areas that are junk areas that are not good for single-family housing. We are lucky here to be on city water or county water and county sewer. So that's nice that we are. A lot of trailer parks have bad water and a lot of problems. This place is a good place to live. I've got good neighbors. I don't have any problems with my neighbors. But it's just difficult. Let's try the FF. All right. But, you know, you have a nice place to live. You got a nice community. I don't know my neighbors. The trailer on this side is empty and has been for many months. The fellow on this end, I'm kind of scared of him. He and the neighbor on this corner almost got in a fight. So I'm like, yeah. But the reason I say this is a good place to live because people are quiet on Friday and Saturday nights. You could hear a pin drop. You don't have loud music playing. You don't have party people. So it's a nice place. But I don't know many of my neighbors. I have tried to get to know my neighbors. I used to get out and walk around the complex when I was able to. I built up to it and I could walk maybe one time around on the big road that goes around the complex. There are 93 units here. But, and they said there were like 400 families. So, maybe more than one family are in some of the units. But, all right, let's do this. I'm going to try to do well for my team. But I'm just sitting here trying to take all this in and just not really believing that they sold our mobile home park again. And now we had taken part of our stimulus and paid for 2 months rent. So we weren't too concerned about our June rent. Usually my check it doesn't come on the 1st. So we usually pay it on the 4th. And so, you know, we've had late fees before because we didn't get in on time. It's not just a matter of putting our credit card number in and having it automatically taken out. No, we had to go to the bank, draw out cash, and go to Walmart and pay cash through this agency. And this is how we've had to pay our rent. Even during COVID, I felt like we were risking our lives to stand in line and do that. I don't think it's fair. But, you know, here we are. I'm not doing too well. Oh, if they only knew what drama was going on in my life. But anyway, sorry, Blue Team. I tried my best. But it's hard. Like that comedian said, life is hard and then you die. But, well, so Team Drivatar won. We're going to try again. We're going to really try to do better. Yep. We're going to try. But I'm sick with all the injustice in this country. You know, if we have Social Security, you shouldn't have to fight if you're disabled and sick, should you? And the Republicans would say, oh, there's all these people wanting to get something for nothing. They want to mooch off the government. Well, I will assure you, I've been on Social Security disability for many years. I am not a moocher. I had experience sitting in many DFAC's office, that's Department of Family and Children's Services if you don't live in Georgia. We call it DFAC's. Or sitting in Social Security offices because of having to get another Social Security card or whatever, and you take a number and you sit for 4 or 5 hours. You get to know people in the waiting room. It's not like that anymore. And I have talked to so many disabled people about how hard it was to get Social Security disability. I've known people who had dying relatives who could not get it. And it's not fair. And I had a lady at work almost cuss me out, saying, well, my daughter has a bad heart and she's dying and she couldn't get disability. What makes you think you deserve disability? And I'm like, well, I'm sorry about your daughter, but I've got a daughter that I've got to support. Your daughter's grown. You know, I mean, you can't compare stuff like that. Yes, it's horrible for somebody with a bad heart who's dying, who can't get disability. What is wrong with our system? And there are many people, I say to you, that need disability and can't get it because the process is so hard over a few crooks. And yeah, there are crooks who want to get Social Security disability, and it's crazy how hard they make Social Security. So, you know, I agree that there shouldn't be fraud, but there is fraud in everything. There is fraud in Medicare and Medicaid, and, you know, crooks are going to be crooks, but why punish the most vulnerable population in the United States? People who are dying shouldn't have to fight for disability. They should just get it. You know, it should be automatic. It should be because of your team, because if you are disabled, you've got a team. You've got a case manager if your health is bad enough. I do. You've got your doctor. You've got maybe an occupational therapist, maybe a physical therapist. I did for a while. You might have a psychologist, psychiatrist if your disability is mental. I mean, there's a whole team of people who has input on your case. So I say to you, why can't your medical records be enough? Why do you have to go through this process of being interrogated, having forms sent to your friends to say, you think she's disabled? I don't get it. I believe that it would be a much fairer system if it was just automatic. But Republicans would say, oh, there's too many handicapped people. We can't afford it as a country. I say to you, as a Christian, now you may be another religion, but I'm saying most of the major religions of the world believe in some form of taking care of the weak. You know, Jesus said that he spent a lot of his time healing the sick, and he cared about the poor. He spent a lot of his time with poor people and with sinners, but he did not ever say in the Bible that handicapped people or mentally ill people or whatever were possessed or bad people. He did exorcise demons out of people. But as far as, he had sympathy for the poor and the disabled. And they've always been treated badly, even back in biblical times. There have always been beggars. He didn't say to the beggars, well, you shouldn't be out here begging. He didn't say that handicapped people shouldn't be allowed to live. He healed them. And I think that any government that doesn't take care of its poor and disabled, there's something wrong there. I think there are probably equivalent phrases in the Quran and in many holy books of many religions of taking care of people when they can't take care of themselves. And you may say, well, we've got separation of church and state in this country. Well, separation of church and state is fine, but there's a moral obligation to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. You've got 70% of this nation who are living paycheck to paycheck. They are trying their best to work and make ends meet, and they can't afford a house. Why? The median price for a house in 2018 was over $200,000. Median means in the middle. My gosh. How can people charge so much for a house? Why can't you have tiny houses for poor people? If you're poor, why can't you have a 125 square foot house? There's a thing called the International Building Code. And it's, supposed to be international. So it's, it's where, it's a set of standards that most countries in the world agree to. You know what the minimum square footage for a domicile is, according to the International Building Code? 88 square feet. Now, I ask you, look at the zoning regulations for your county, wherever it is in the United States. Georgia has 159 counties. I live in Catoosa County. Zoning regulations stipulate that you have to have a 1,200 square foot house to be able to get a building permit. This is outrageous. There have been many people in the tiny house movement, not all of which are poor, who just decide to go for a minimalist lifestyle, and they want to have a tiny home. And a lot of people make tiny homes out of shipping containers. Now, shipping containers is an interesting topic. China has the market cornered on just about anything made out of steel. China makes fasteners. That's why we have spectacular building failures. Because, and I don't blame the Chinese people. It's popular to blame China for everything. But consider that there was a National Geographic article a few years back about gangs in China. And these gangs are in a lot of industries, and they'll say, oh, we're going to substitute this ingredient for that because it's cheaper. And it ends up being something with lead in it that poisons baby, and ends up in being an ingredient in cat food that kills cats or dogs. It will end up being something, and the Chinese people have to put up with these defects of manufacture as well. It affects them as much as it affects us. I had a coworker with Chinese ancestry, and she had the opportunity to go to China. Her mother was from southern China. Her dad was from northern China. And she got to visit both towns that her parents grew up in. In one, they were having a big celebration because they were putting in a well. These people in northern China, it gets very cold. It gets a lot colder than it does in the winter here in Georgia. It gets colder than it does in New York. So you can imagine they don't have heaters in their homes. They don't have trees because they burn them all. So they have to pretty much burn manure for fuel, for cooking. And they were having to go 2 miles to the nearest stream, which was polluted, by the way. They have horrible problems in China with pollution and with, just generally not caring about the people. The government does not care about the common people, and the common people are illiterate. They cannot read their own Chinese language. That shocked me that, here they are, they're taught to believe that the communist government is a good thing and that they should be proud of it and all this stuff, and yet it doesn't care enough to even provide its people with the basic necessities of life, like water and food. It blows my mind. I knew a young lady from China. She was so sweet. She was a member of my church and a very devout member of my church, by the way. In China, religion is discouraged. My church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, can't even send missionaries to China. They can send people to teach English, but they can't talk about the church. They can't mention anything about religion. It's forbidden. So you've got missionaries who learn Chinese and they go to teach English as a second language. So, our church is active in China in that way, but we don't proselytize. Anyway, this young lady, she was a beautiful Chinese lady. She was about the age of my older daughter, and I really loved her. One day, and she was giving my daughter piano lessons for free because I couldn't afford them. And she was getting her master's degree in organ from BYU. We lived in Provo, Utah at the time. One day she comes to my door crying, and she had never showed any negative emotion. So I hugged her and I said, "What's wrong?" And she says, "I have to go back. The government revoked my visa and they will hurt my family if I don't go back." And we cried together. It was so sad. She didn't want to go back, but she didn't want her family to be hurt. And how many people have had to go through this, that they go to some place and have a taste of freedom, and then they have to go back to the most oppressive government in the world? It's horrible. If you haven't known somebody from someplace different, or even as far as black people that you might work with at work, or even see in your neighborhood, if you don't know them, how do you know their struggles? If you don't talk to them about things that really matter, about race and prejudice and injustice, and you may be of the opinion, oh, black people have the same rights of everybody, yeah, and they can do anything that they want to, they can start a business and all that, but if you consider that if you are a person of color, it's going to be harder to get a loan to start a new business. It's going to be harder to stay in business because there are people who are jealous. White people like me. I've known a lot of black families, and I didn't realize until I moved into a neighborhood that was mixed black and white, more on the black side than the white side. And I didn't mind that. I didn't even look at that. I just wanted a house. And my realtor found me this house, and she sent me the pictures, and I fell in love with it. And, I was happy to have black neighbors, and they welcomed me into the neighborhood, and it was great. We looked out for each other. One night I looked out my window. My neighbor had been burning leaves. She had a fellow to come over and burn leaves. Well, he didn't make sure that the fire was out. 2 o'clock in the morning, I see the flicker of the light on my window, and I look out to see what it is, and her pile of leaves is on fire and about ready to catch her house on fire. So I wake Maggie up, we go out, and we knock on her door, and she's solidly asleep. We woke her up and said, your pile of leaves has ignited again, and where's your garden hose? And she says, my hose is too short, it wouldn't reach it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So we got our garden hose, attached it to hers, and we put it out. And I brought a shovel, and my daughter, turned it over until we were absolutely sure the fire was out. I was a Girl Scout leader, so I know a little bit about fires and how to start them and how to make sure your campfire is out. They really emphasize that in Girl Scouts. So, bless her heart, I would have cried if anything happened to her. She was so sweet. But I also saw racism. Several of my cousins lived in the area, and they would not visit me because I lived in a black neighborhood. And that really hurt my feelings. It's like, what's so bad about black people that you don't want to come visit me? And people from my church, the same way. And it's like, what is wrong with people? I loved my black neighbors just as much as I loved my white neighbors. And all of them would have done anything for us. They were really sweet people. Southwest Georgia is not like any place else in the world. People act like you're their long-lost sister. I will never forget the first time that I went to the post office box to check our mail. And this black lady comes up to me and says, hey! And we got to talking, and before we finished, I gave her a hug. She was a sweet little old lady, and she had been a teacher. And, treated me like her long-lost sister. And I thought, what a wonderful place this is. It's just like Mama told me about when I was a kid. She, talked about going to town and how people were good to her and everything. And it's really a shame that somebody who hasn't had that experience, who hasn't had a black friend, you don't realize how close-knit these black communities are, how loyal they are to one another. They stick together. We white people, we get in a neighborhood and we might not even know our neighbors because we're scared of them or whatever. And you don't get to know people that way. Oh, horse-a-thon. Let's go to horse-a-thon. But if you don't know people,
good luck.
If you don't know a member of the black community, if you don't know a Hispanic person, if you don't know a refugee, how can you judge them? There is a Native American saying that if you want to know me, walk a mile in my shoes. And what it means is you need to get to know somebody before you start saying mean things about them or saying that their customs are strange, whatever. When I joined my church, it's the Mormon Church. It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, I'm not here to preach at you. I'm just going to say that there are two kinds of Mormons. There are the Reformed Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a lot of them have reality shows, so people have gotten to thinking about Mormons as polygamists and all that. We don't do that. It's illegal. We don't do things that are against the law. So I don't think these people should call themselves Mormons, but anyway. We are called Mormons by people outside the church because of the Book of Mormon, which both groups of my church believe in. But, I'm talking about my church because it's a culture. It's a culture that I had to learn when I joined it. So, every ethnic group has a culture. And our culture in my church is not to cuss at all, not to drink coffee or tea, and to, we do believe in the Ten Commandments, and there are some basic core beliefs that we have that may differ from other churches. We are really not a Protestant church. We are not Catholic. We are a different religion. But we are still Christian, just like the Protestants, just like the Catholics. We are Christian. We believe in Jesus Christ. So, some people think we're odd because we don't cuss, and we don't think cussing is right. There are things in my religion that is a culture. And black people have a culture that is all their own. They're very tight-knit in their communities. If they have a little food, they will share it, even if they're starving. How many white people will do that? I don't know. Some will and some won't. But generally speaking, black communities stick together and they take care of anybody who can't take care of themselves. And I think we white people are not quite as good at that. Yes, we do a lot of charity work and stuff, but how many of us go and check on our neighbors to see if they're okay? I saw the black community really mobilized. They took care of their own. So, black people have a culture, Hispanic people have a culture. And you can't just say Hispanic people have a culture, because Guatemalans have a slightly different culture than Mexicans, and Puerto Ricans have a different culture than Creole people. I mean, you've got different groups that have different beliefs, have different customs. America is a melting pot after all. There is room for more than one culture in our country. And so I believe that the issues of race, handicapped folks, gender identity, all of these social issues that we have, the homeless, the mentally ill, the incarcerated, it's all connected. It's all parts of the same ugly problem. And until we learn to get along as a people of many different cultures, we are going to handicap our government and our people. Because if we're going to prosper together, we've got to see eye to eye. We have got to find common ground. And, you know, I really believe that we should be loving one another, not preaching hate, not saying, okay, this group is bad or this group, you know, does things I don't like. And, you know, why do we get into these arguments anyway? We need to realize that we are one country. We are a melting pot. We are a combination of races, cultures, creeds, religions. I have been persecuted because of my religion, so I understand what persecution's all about. Let me tell you, when you work in an office situation, you've got people Mormon bashing outside your cubicle, that is persecution. It's not the same as the persecution that a black person goes through, where you're put down because of the color of your skin. So I'm not saying it's as bad as what black people go through.
4, 3, 2.
But persecution is a bad thing.
Round 1 started.
All right, we're going to get to the speed trap. So I'm thinking about a lot of different things tonight. I feel very traumatized that our trailer was sold and I might not have a place to live. I'm very worried about it. Prices for things are outrageous for places to live, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to afford any of our options. We also have 3 pets, and
in 400 meters,
you know, most apartments are either no pet or 1 pet. Even if you're handicapped and one of them is a service dog. So we have a dog and 2 cats. The dog is my service dog. He could come. Oh dear. But what about our 2 cats?
It is safe to do so.
Our cats are important to my mental health. They really comfort me when I'm upset or not feeling well. They're nurse kitties. I need them. I don't want to leave them behind. It hurts. It hurts. There were people who would not leave the Katrina area because they had pets that they loved. I think it is cruel and unusual punishment to separate a handicapped person and their pets. You know, if you don't have pets and you don't like pets, you don't really understand what bond it is between a person and their pet. But gosh, it's like losing a child to lose a pet. And I don't say that lightly. I've lost 4 children, so, you know, I know grief and I know it well. You know, pets have short lifespans, and every grief adds to the pile of grief in your heart. Those anniversaries hurt.
When it is safe to do so.
It hurts to be without them. One of the great comforts of my religion is that we believe your pets will be waiting for you in heaven. And so I'll be reunited with all of my precious babies.
Turn right.
But
Round 1 complete. Get to round 2.
okay. But
100 meters. Turn
when you
left.
talk about things like discrimination and,
Recalculating route.
you know,
In 100
I
meters.
have
Turn left.
had to deal with a lot of the
200
same
meters,
problems
turn
of
sharp
my
right.
black neighbors. You know,
Turn sharp right.
living in areas where there is crime. Oh, it's this one. Oh no,
Turn around
I had
when it
so
is
much
safe to
trouble
do so.
hitting this. Oh. Oh yeah, this is going to be tricky. You know, I've lived in a lot of poor neighborhoods, and there have always been black people around me in those poor neighborhoods. I've seen a lot of the trials of
Turn
my
around
black
when it is
neighbors,
safe to do so.
especially when it comes to being evicted. There was this lady in my apartment complex. It was a mixed unit. Way back yonder, I was going to explain about the different types of public housing. Usually you're limited to 1 pet at these places, if they even allow pets. And it depends on the apartment complex whether they do or not.
In 100 meters.
We
turn
lived
right.
in public housing in Gainesville,
In 200
and
meters.
I was scared to
turn
death
right.
there. There was a guy near us in a wheelchair who was beating his wife regularly. They were Hispanic.
Turn right.
I felt so sorry for her. She came in a couple of times to use the phone. She spoke very little English, and she was terrified. And I could see that. That's something that goes beyond, you know, language barriers or whatever. You can tell when somebody is terrified. She was terrified to be in my house because of her husband and how he might see that. And her trying to use my phone, you know, I was very willing for her to use my phone, and I
Turn
told her
around
she could come
when it is
back and
safe
use
to
my
do so.
phone anytime, but she only came the one time. And she had 2 little children clinging to her dress. And I just see that frightened face. And, you know, abuse knows no racial boundaries or
In 100 meters.
cultural
turn right.
boundaries.
In 200
Abuse
meters.
is everywhere.
Turn right.
And I've experienced it
right.
firsthand, and it's a very ugly kind of thing. It's very sad that so much of it goes on in our country.
Recalculating route.
And I wish that there were more laws to protect the helpless. Whoop, sorry.
Turn
Oh,
around
this is
when
so
it
hard.
safe to do so.
We're all trying so hard. So, you know, I see all of the injustice in the world, and I am 62 years old. I have
100
seen
meters,
a
turn
lot
sharp
of
right.
injustice. I was horrified
Turn
when
around
Martin Luther
when it is
King
safe
was
to do
killed.
so.
I saw that on television at age 10. I cried about it because I thought it was
200
horrible
meters,
this great
turn
man
right.
was just
Turn right.
murdered in cold blood for what he believed. And his words were very wise. Even at 10, I thought he was very wise. And I liked what he said. I would watch his speeches. And it was
Turn around
an awful
when it is safe
thing
to do
to
so.
hear my white neighbors talking about the N-word and saying bad things about black people when I had black friends.
Recalculating route.
And I didn't see what they saw. You know. My dad, at the end of World War II, came to live in
Turn
Edison,
right.
Georgia. A little small town in Georgia. Tiny little town, smaller than Cuthbert, where I live. I
Turn
wasn't
around
born yet.
when it is safe to do so.
The Ku Klux Klan came around and they wanted him to join them. And he said no. I am so proud of my father for saying that, even though he was racist. There is no doubt. My father was very racist. He had no use for black people, and he didn't mince words when he talked about black people. He used
Turn
the
sharp
N-word
right.
a lot. I grew up with that. It made me sad because, you know, Mama would explain to me that black people still bleed red. She was a nurse. She watched a young black girl who was stabbed bleed to
Round
death.
2 complete. Get to round 3.
So she saw the fruits of racism up close and personal. And black people, that there is no basis for race. Did you know that? There is no genetic base for race. They found out in the scientific community that racial characteristics are really just characteristics that can show up
In 400 meters,
in anybody.
turn left.
It's not, it's a group of genetic traits. It's not even something that, you know, it's not like black people are a different species or whatever, like some white people would have you believe. There were movements like the eugenics movement. I was watching a documentary over the weekend on Ellis Island. And one of the ways that they would gauge mental fitness to be an immigrant
Turn around when it is
was
safe
they
to
would
do so.
look at the shape of the face and they would say, oh, this person's mentally deficient because of, you know. And they discriminated against certain groups who were trying to gain entrance to this country, and they also discriminated against Russians. So a lot of Jews who came from Russia were not accepted to be immigrants. And they had to go back to Russia and deal with persecution. There was nothing wrong with them. You know, these theories that said shape of the face had something to do with intelligence, it's debunked. It's not true, but that racism still lives on today. The ugly shadow of eugenics and other theories that try to claim that there are certain physical characteristics that make somebody unfit in some way. And that's totally barbaric. You would think we as a civilized people would grow beyond that and realize that some people just have genetic traits that, you know, they may look a certain way or whatever, but if you look at family photographs, a lot of those traits carry down through the generations. It's just a group of gene traits. But people are more than the color of their skin. There is a culture that goes along with being black or being Hispanic. And it depends on where your ancestors came from. Just like us white people, I come from Scottish, Irish, and German.
Turn around when it is safe
And
to do so.
so, you know, I probably have some personality traits that were handed down. Talents with woodworking carried down in my father's side of the family. They were, oh man, my grandfather made these steps and they were like glass. They were beautiful. The wood was stained red and it was polished to a T. And I would sit on those steps. I can't believe I missed that. I would sit on those steps and just run my hand over them. They were cool and they just felt like glass. It was unreal that a person could make wood feel like glass. And
Turn around when it is
his
safe to
father
do
and
so.
grandfather were very good at woodworking, and you can tell from their occupations, and I found that in the U.S. Census. They ask different questions every 10 years, and so there are, you find out basic things of whether they were renting or owning, were they a farm worker, did they have assets, did they
Turn
have
around
slaves.
when it is safe
I
to
was
do
very
so.
proud that nobody in my family really owned slaves. I didn't find any of them, of my direct line relatives, that kept slaves. It's probably because they were too poor, but I'm glad they didn't keep slaves. So you find out a lot.
Round 3
From
complete.
just,
Congratulations.
yay, we did it. But, you can find out so much about your heritage just looking at your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and just finding out a little about them. You kind of get to know them in the heart, It's a good thing. And genealogy is harder for people of color because it's harder to find records. There is a huge database that the National Archives is working on now. It's a project. It's the Freedmen's Database. And if you go to the National Archive, if you go to archive.gov and read up on it, if you are wanting to volunteer to read old handwriting and try to decipher what it says, they can use volunteers to index. So, it'd be a very good thing if you decided to help out with that, if you're so inclined. But not only, your heritage has a lot to do with your culture. You tend to pick up habits from your fathers and grandfathers and your mothers and your grandmothers and people that you know and respect. You tend to kind of incorporate part of them into you. We are a product of genetics and we are a product of environment. And there's been the argument all these years in psychology of whether heredity or environment has more of an influence on a person's personality. And the answer is both. You can't separate them, really. You can argue until the cows come home. But really, you've got so many factors that come to play when a child is born, and the experiences that that child goes through will shape his personality, but also his genetics will play a part. And do you know it's possible for a pair of white parents to have a black baby? It's possible for a pair of black parents to have a white baby. And that child, being of the wrong color, is going to suffer because it's, and it's genetics. It's a set of genetic traits that determines what color a baby's skin is going to be. There are a lot of Hispanics with white skin, just like me. Lily white skin. I am whiter than a lot of my peers. So, probably because I'm sickly. It's important that we come to understandings between cultures, between skin colors, between religions. We need to all come together as a world and be international citizens. We need to realize that the United States is not the do-all and be-all of the world. I love my country, don't get me wrong. But to say that we're better than everybody else because we're Americans, and by the way, we're not really Americans, we are North Americans. You forget about South America when you say that. Oh, I'm an American. Well, so are people in South America. So, we don't have a corner on the term American. I tend to avoid that because it's not fair. I would love to see world peace, but we're not going to see world peace until we stop persecuting groups that believe differently than we do. Why can't we just get along? Why can't we just have friends of all nationalities, all cultures, all religions, and not try to force them to my religion, my skin color, my culture? Why should I expect other people to adhere to my narrow views? Because we are, in the United States, people of the world. We have people from all countries, all cultures, all religions here, all beliefs. We do not have to force everybody to be like a cookie cutter and be of a particular religion, a particular culture. We need to all come together for the rights of our citizens. We need to make sure that we are guaranteeing the rights of the Constitution to everybody in this country. And we need to remember that people are innocent until proven guilty. This is a basic tenet of our forefathers, our laws. Everything's built on that premise that a man is not guilty until he's been tried in a court of law. But yet we're willing to be judge, jury, and lynching mob to groups of people that we don't like. I don't understand it, and I never will understand it. There is no scientific proof that a black man is less intelligent than a white man. And there are still people who believe that, but they're sadly mistaken. If you deny privileges because of a person's skin color, There was a study that they did in a school to prove that racial slurs were harmful. They had children separated by eye color. That's something you can't help. Everybody's born with a different color eyes. So they had the children with blue and green eyes persecuting the brown-eyed children. And then they turned around and had the children with blue and brown eyes persecuted by the green-eyed children. And then they turned around and had the blue-eyed children persecuted by the brown and green-eyed children. They quit doing this because they found it was so psychologically harmful just to do this for a day that they decided that's not a good thing to study. What does that tell you about a black child who is continually persecuted by white people, telling them that they're bad, telling them that because they have brown skin they'll never amount to anything, giving them all of these negative psychological messages. And then you look at crime in this country. Yes, black people make a disproportionate amount of people who are incarcerated. Well, you might say, well, that just proves they're bad. Nope. It just proves that police are more likely to arrest a person of color than they are a person who is white. I do not believe that black people commit more crime than white people. I believe that black people are blamed for white crime a whole lot more than white people. And black people have told me in my neighborhood that they were afraid to call the police when we had this dangerous prowler and there had been some elderly women killed. I was terrified. I had that prowler for 4 years. I could not get my mortgage company to release me from my home. They wanted me to pay for that home whether I lived in it or not. Now, I'm not a deadbeat. I pay my bills. I don't let things slide. I pay bills before I do anything else. So, why is it then that when I had reason to believe my life was in danger, that I could not short sale or get, what is it when you just sell the title back to the lender? They wouldn't let me do that. I think that if your life is in danger, you should be allowed to get out of your mortgage. It's ridiculous that you have to, I didn't know I was going to move into a neighborhood with a prowler. And this was an equal opportunity prowler. He was a black man, but that doesn't prove that black people are bad. He was persecuting my black neighbors as well as me. He was peeping Tom to my daughter, who was 14. I was terrified that she was going to have something bad happen to her. And my poor black friends were afraid to call the police to protect them because they said, oh, they'll find an excuse to arrest me. Now, I didn't think they were doing anything wrong, and I knew them well enough to know that they were good people and they were law-abiding people. So, why this fear among black people to call the police? This is why a lot of black people nowadays are saying, defund the police. They're not doing me any good. Well, for a black person, police are useless because they're more likely to arrest the person who called them. This is not right. It should not be that way. That, I have something called white privilege. Just because I'm white, I can call the police and get them out here in a New York minute. And if I feel threatened, they will listen to me and they will help me. I've had a lot of good experiences with the police. I've never had a policeman be rude to me or treat me differently because I'm disabled. They are all polite to me. I have a very high opinion of police officers, so don't think I'm anti-police or anything. But it's disturbing to find that black people are terrified of the police because they get pulled over for no reason. They get accused of things they didn't do. So no wonder our jails are bursting at the seams with black people who probably didn't do anything and are sitting in jail because they got accused of something they didn't do and because the courts failed them because of white racism. It makes me sick. I want to believe that I live in a country where you can get a fair trial. But how can you get a fair trial when your neighbors are racist? So, if you persecute a people and you keep telling people that they're bad, that they don't deserve the same laws and treatment as another segment of the population, it wouldn't matter what color their skin was. They might start thinking that they're bad. And if they think they're bad, then why not go do crime? They're going to arrest me anyway. So you might have some of that going on too. Low self-esteem leads to crime. And what better way to lower a person's self-esteem than persecute him? All these innocent young boys told that they're bad and living in poverty, which doesn't help a parent do a good job. I'm not saying that black people do a bad job of raising their children. On the contrary, I think that most black parents are very good parents. But I see a lot of abandonment by black male parents. I see a lot of abuse by black male boyfriends. And you have to wonder what motivates somebody to get like that. Well, wouldn't it be a correlation that if you treat them like they're bad, maybe they're going to act bad? So maybe you get more of that in the black community than you do the white community. Although I have seen a bunch of white husbands treating their wives like slaves, especially here in the South. It's an ugly fact of the South that there are a lot of white men who mistreat their wives, who consider them more slaves and, oh, go get me that. They're able to get up and get it themselves, but no, they make the wife do it because they enjoy dominating another person. So I give you that. It's not just black people that do evil. It's not just white people that do evil. Satan is out there influencing, and we can either stand against him or succumb to his false beliefs. And I think one of the biggest tools Satan uses in the world is racism, persecution, abuse, all of these negative things. They are the ills of the world. We need a kinder, gentler world, like Jesus talked about. He talked about do good to your neighbor even though he persecute you. You know, that says a lot, you know. And black people do that. They're nice to the very people who treat them like dirt. You know. And I try to be that way. You know, I've had people for no reason to attack me. I can remember I was on a committee when I was in Votech school. And this one lady just kept wanting to run everything. I was the group leader. I was supposed to be running the group. She wanted to run the group. And finally, I just left and I went in the bathroom and I cried. And my friends came to see about me. They said, "What's wrong?" And I told them what was going on. And this was a white lady. You know? You would think that in Votech school, people would act like adults, but she wasn't having any of that. She was a lot younger than me. But I will never forget how that felt. You know, and I think a lot of black people have that same frustration, that they are struggling to do their job or to do whatever they've been given to do, and they get attacked personally because somebody thinks they ought not to be doing it. It's not right. It's not right. I am against all forms of persecution. If you don't like somebody, think about why don't you like that person? What have they done to deserve the way you treat them? And think about maybe your worldview is not a good one. If you're persecuting somebody, why? Why can't you show love like Jesus taught us, you know? Or like Muhammad taught you, or like, you know, whoever your religious leader taught you. If you don't have a religion, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not attacking atheists, but I'm saying, do you try to be a good person? Do you try to treat people like they're of value? You know, we need to be kinder and gentler with each other. I just believe that if we just thought about the things that we say to one another, and if we just tried to be a little kinder, how much better a place the world would be. We're all in this together. You know, there's COVID and there's new strains are coming out. There's a strain in Vietnam that is a combination, is a hybrid of the strain they were worried about in India and the strain they were worried about in the UK, which is all over the United States. If this new hybrid gets out of Vietnam, we are going to have a time of it because it's worse than the strains we have seen. It is more contagious and it is deadlier. And it hits younger people. Now, we don't have a vaccine yet for people under 16. And yet, there's this movement to get kids back in school. We need kids back in school. But a lot of the school systems are not taking precautions seriously enough, I think. You don't want to have children congregating in halls without masks. You don't want to give children a choice about mask wearing. They need to wear masks. You know, we need to think about the good things that have come out of COVID. not only have we found out that a lot of black parents want to do homeschooling because they are finding that their children are mentally healthier without all the persecution that they get at school. I think that any parent with concerns, a lot of handicapped children's parents are very concerned about putting them back in a school environment, because not only can their child die easier if they've got major health problems, so if they get COVID, they're going to have worse consequences from that. Also, being a parent of a handicapped child and dealing with the public school system, it was like pulling teeth. Both my girls had ADD. They were not hyperactive. They were very distractible, to the point that my older daughter, I was constantly getting called in from the school because her state of disorganization was a big problem, and I had a lot of pressure to put her on medication, and I did. But then she got teased about taking her medicine at school. Back then you could do that. Now they don't allow any medicine taking at school. What about if a kid needs medication? What if they need asthma medicine? You can't say, wait until you get home to use your inhaler. I don't know what some teachers are thinking. So, here we are. And my daughter quit taking her medicine for her ADD. She didn't want to be made fun of anymore. I couldn't blame her for that, so I let her come off of it. I figure it's her body, it's her choice whether she wants to take the medicine or not. She didn't see any benefit to it. I saw a lot of benefit, and I saw when she came off the medicine that her behavior was a lot worse. But I put up with it because, if a kid is getting persecuted because they're taking medicine at school, well, that's not right. Why don't schools attack bullying with the same fervor that they attack students for not paying attention or whatever? I think that any child psychologist who walked into a teacher's classroom, there's a movement to put psychology in the schools, and I applaud it. I think it's about time. Methods that teachers are taught to use, like punishing the whole class because one person is misbehaving, it's not fair. Kids have a keen sense of fairness. And, hello. They know when they're being treated unfairly. And any child psychologist will tell you, you don't punish the whole class, and you don't expect a person to rat on their friends. That's just, it doesn't work. It backfires on you, and it makes the class harder to, I'm just running. I'm not. I've got all of it.
Okay.
Yeah. I've run on all the roads. I've gotten the achievement. Yeah.
I'll leave you to your rant about child support.
Well, I've studied psychology. I have 28 quarter hours in the behavioral sciences.
That would happen a lot in class. One kid would, if a kid wanted to protect another kid, then they would take the rap for something that they do. And if one kid wanted to get in trouble, like never do me a lot, they would say that they did something.
Yeah.
Joseph and the other.
Don't name names. Yeah, but
the Hispanic boy in the class would do that to me a lot.
Yeah, they liked her, you see, and so they kind of teased her, and yeah, it gets bad. But the thing is, kids will be kids. Kids will say mean things. Kids will, but what we need to do in our public schools is not expect children to police each other, because it's not fair.
Yeah.
We have? Wow. A little thunder. But, we need to use methods that psychologists would recommend. And by the way, school psychologists are not psychologists at all. They are experimental psychologists. School psychologists are psychometrists. They give tests. We already know that all these standardized tests, for all the care that goes into the design, they are discriminatory, because it depends on what culture you're in. If you are white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, you are likely to get the answers right. If you are not, if you belong to a different culture, you are likely to miss questions, and a lot of them are word problems. This is not fair. It's not objective. And to force kids to prepare for tests and to force teachers to teach to the tests, it's not school. It becomes a circus, and it becomes a circus of persecution for anybody who's not white or who's from another country and trying to learn to speak the language. So why can't we do away with all this testing? We are using concepts that businesses use in management. We are benchmarking, we are trying to have scientific measures of progress, and we are forgetting to treat our students like people. It's very sad. We need to stop teaching the way we teach. We need to stop teaching our teachers to persecute students. We need to realize that students should have human rights, basic human rights. I remember one time I was in first grade in public school, in elementary school. I was an exuberant child. I was very intelligent and very talkative, and it was very hard to keep my attention for long. I was ADD, but nobody knew it yet. And this teacher, she was very strict. She was an older lady. Took me in the closet with a younger teacher, pulled my pants down, and paddled me with a wooden paddle from, they used to have things called bolo bats. This was a bolo bat. It has a little elastic string on it with a ball, and you pop, 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 She had one of those without the ball on it. And I had a bruised and very sore bottom. My mother, who was an emergency room nurse, hit the ceiling. She went charging up there to the school, and she said, "Don't you ever hit my child again. Ever." I witnessed a lot of paddlings when I was in, it's my house. Whoops. I'm going to leave now. But I witnessed a lot of paddlings in school because they were still paddling people in the 70s when I was in junior high. And some of those paddlings I witnessed were more like beatings, and I thought it was barbaric. No matter what a student's done, should you hit them? It affected me. The violence I witnessed affected me. I would go home and cry after witnessing one of those paddlings. It was horrible. And I was so glad when they finally said there will be no more paddling. It was just an excuse to abuse students, really. And if you're gonna paddle a student, you're not gonna pull back like this, like you're batting at a baseball, for Pete's sakes. And some of those men teachers had paddles with holes drilled into them. And I was told by the boys that those really hurt worse. And I wonder how many kids ended up with back problems from paddling. You don't beat a child because he's bad. You talk to him and find out what is going on, why he won't behave. Any child psychologist would say that, beating a child is not going to get him to mind. It's just going to make him scared of you. Children can be reasoned with. You have to give it in small doses, and you have to allow them to explain what they were doing and listen to them. Because kids know if you're not in the mood to listen. And I think that a major fault of public schools, first of all, is having it at the county level. The county superintendent decides what curriculum and what wonderful new theory of education is going to be practiced or experimented on the children this year. And it was like whiplash. Every time I turned around in our school system when I was growing up, there was a different method that the teachers were trying on us to see if we learned better. Why do we adopt these unproven methods, and why do we use methods of management in business in schools? Children are not grown-ups. They are not workers. They are, they love to learn until they go to school, and then they realize that, I gotta do this. Give me a break. I was there when the calculator became a thing, and suddenly kids didn't want to learn multiplication tables, and it was like pulling teeth trying to get them to. I witnessed it in my own children. Why do you force children to learn something when they know they can just pick up a calculator? It has no purpose. And so many times in schools, we teach things that do not do students well. There was this theory about the turn of the century in school systems that, how do I know this? I went to my public library, and they were giving away a bunch of old books from the 20s and 30s, and a lot of them were about education. And I got a whole stack of them. I wanted to learn about theories of education. So I read some of these books, and I was 11. I wanted to understand why they had periods of 45 minutes, 7 periods a day, as opposed to 55 minutes, 6 periods a day like my school did. And the interesting thing was, they thought kids would be smarter if they taught them hard subjects. So this is where a lot of the stuff that's still practiced today in education came from. All of these theories and semester system versus quarter system versus 9-week system in elementary and high school. I mean, all these theories about how do we make children learn? And the key word there is make. Why do we force learning? If you make it interesting for students, they will learn. I never saw a kid when I was growing up who didn't want to learn something. If they're motivated, they'll work their little hearts out. Case in point, I'm 14. My mother interviews a DJ at the local radio station. And Obie Robinson said to me, "Oh, there's no age limit on this. You could do it at 14. And I'm like, "Really? I could be a DJ?" And he says, "Yes." And I'm like, "Ooh." And so the next day, I called the station manager of WCON, AM and FM in Cornelia, Georgia. And I said, "I want to be a DJ." And she says, "Oh, okay. Here's the address. You write to this place in Louisiana and you pay $1 and you get this book. And you study that book and you go to Atlanta to the FCC and take your test." Back then you had to pass 3 tests. You had to pass one on the FCC Act of 1934. You had to pass one on the laws and regulations of the FCC. And then there was that third one. That third one was full of physics, formulas, and electronics. You had to be able to convert plate current to antenna current and antenna current to plate current. Now this was archaic stuff because nobody had to do those calculations. They had a chart at the radio station and you just looked on the chart. It was all done. The math was all done. You didn't have to figure that stuff out. But the test said you had to learn all that. So I studied. One day we had a tornado warning and we had to actually turn our desks upside down and get under them. And everybody was scared. I was under there with my little manual. I was reading and studying. That's how I got my mind off the situation. I studied that FCC manual. And I studied that thing. I took it with me in my purse. If we had to wait in line anywhere, I was reading that at the grocery store. I mean, I was studying that thing every spare minute for a year. And when I felt I knew the stuff well enough, I said, "Mama, can we go down to the FCC office?" And so we went down there. And we ended up, I went and took the 3 tests. Now here I am, I'm 15 by that time. I am the youngest person in the room. Most of these guys were 18 and 19-year-olds from Georgia Tech. So here I was in this room full of grown-ups, basically, and there was one woman who was 17, and she didn't pass. But I passed the first 2 elements, and then there was the third one I did not pass. And they said, "Oh, you'll have to come back in 30 days. And I'm like devastated. 30 days. And she said, "Well, you can get a waiver and come back this Friday." This was a Tuesday in 1974. And I said, "Mama, can you come back Friday?" She says, "Yes." So I studied really, really hard, and on the third try, I passed. So here I am with my bright, shiny new third-class radio telephone permit with broadcast endorsement, a blue piece of paper about yay big. And so first thing I did, we got home too late that Friday for me to call the radio station. First thing Monday morning, I call her and I say, I passed my test. When can I start training? And there was this pause at the other end of the line. And she said, all right, you may come in on Friday and Saturday from 12 to 4.
Turn left.
And train with Star Harrison. She is 16 and I just hired her as a DJ. So I no longer have a position open. I was devastated that there was no position open, but this was, you did the, if I'm going to make it on time, I better quick travel. Yeah.
You have arrived early.
It was
Forces on live
kind
will begin
of
soon.
unheard of for somebody my age to get that license. I was the second youngest in my county to get it. There was one person that got it at 14. And I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't I study harder and get it sooner? But, basically, it was a big deal. I was all excited. I was going to learn to be a DJ. And back then, you apprenticed to somebody who was a DJ to learn how to do it. There was a lot to learn. You had to play so many commercials during your shift. You had to play so many public service announcements during your shift. Every 2 hours, you had to go into the equipment room and take meter readings. That was my favorite part of the day because you might have to adjust the power. Now, at third class, you cannot adjust the frequency. That is for the first class engineer. He has to know a lot more. And our first class engineer was a great guy. He loved to explain things, and I loved to ask questions, so we got along great. If there was anything wrong with the equipment, he would come, and I would ask him questions about the equipment. I wanted to learn more. I was so excited about
Forces on
the
live.
prospect
Starting
of
in
a job.
5, 4, 3,
3, 2,
1.
1,
Go!
go!
Round
Which
1
way?
started.
Speed trap. Okay. Here I go. So, here I was, a young girl of 15, learning a very complicated routine. And loving it, just eating it up. The 16-year-old happened to be very immature, and she would put on long records and go out and sunbathe in the yard of the radio station, which was in a neighborhood. And I thought that was shameful, You're not there. You're not supposed to leave the building for any reason. You are supposed to be in there with the equipment watching it. So I would go watch the equipment while she sunbathed.
Turn around when it is safe to do so.
I was afraid to turn her in because I was afraid that she would think that any 15 or 16-year-old didn't need to be working her station. So I didn't tell on her, but I sure thought very badly of her. And I would tell Mama about it, and she's like, well, she shouldn't be doing that. And playing 33 1/3. Now, let me tell you, when I was in 1974, 75, people played records. They didn't play 8 tracks or other means of getting music. music. There were no CDs back then. This was a 33 1/3 was a record with maybe 12 songs on it, like a CD. The 45s, you had to change the speed on the turntable to 45 revolutions per minute. The big ones were 33 1/3 revolutions a minute, so it was slower. You had to adjust the speed of the turntable depending on what kinds of things you were playing. A DJ in those days mostly played 45s. That's one song per side of the disc. And the 33 1/3s, you would turn them over and have 12 songs on the other side of the disc. This 16-year-old would put on a 33 1/3, that's about 30 minutes worth of music, and go out and sunbathe. And I thought it was the most immature thing I'd ever seen. I would never have thought to do that. I wasn't into sunbathing, first of all. And second of all, I had a great sense of responsibility. I was, at 11, Mama was sick one time, and I was home from school for the summer. I said, Mama, send me to the grocery store in a taxi, and I'll get your groceries, because my sister was working. And so she would have had to have worked a whole long day and then gone to the store, and I knew she wouldn't feel much like it. So I was, I had learned how to write a check. Mama taught me. And she knew I could do it. She said, okay, go get your counter checks. When we first moved in, my parents had to get counter checks before they got their account open. It used to be you could just ask for counter checks with your bank account number printed on them, and you can still do this while you're waiting for your checks to come in the mail. So that's counter checks. I learned how to write out checks, and I would write out checks, and I would erase and use the same ones, but I still had some blank ones. So I proved to Mama that I knew how to write a check, and she says, all right, I guess you can go. But, we've got a $30 a week budget. Food was a lot cheaper in the 60s. This was late 60s. And so I went in the taxi and I got some things that were cheaper than Mama would have gotten. I got some generics. Back then, generics were very low quality, and Mama liked her
Round one complete.
brand
Get
name
to round
stuff.
two.
Nowadays, generics are just like the real stuff, but back then, generics were really poor quality.
Turn right.
And after eating some of the food that was generic, I agreed with Mama that maybe I should have stuck to the brand names, even though this was a few cents cheaper per can. But, and I had to get meat. I had to pick out good meat. She said I did a good job at that. I had to pick out good produce because, I was buying everything on the list. That meant produce, meat, eggs, and I had to pick out these things. And Mama, oops, all right. Mama really thought I did an excellent job, and as a matter of fact, she's like, you didn't get yourself a candy bar at the checkout? This was our routine, that I always got a candy bar at the checkout. And I said, no, Mama, because I wanted to make sure I had enough money and that I didn't go over $30. She said, I'm going to let you do this again, and by the way, be sure you can have $1 to spend. That's okay. And so I got my $1 to spend, and I would go. We made it a regular habit. If Mama had a bad headache and she felt like she couldn't do the shopping, And of course, that wasn't all the time, but you know, I made about 4 trips to the grocery store that summer at 11, getting groceries just like a grown-up. And part of that was buying Mama's cigarettes. Now, it's illegal for an under 18-year-old to buy cigarettes. So I would have to convince them that this is for my mother, I'm not, you know. And this was in a small town, and the people who worked there, Mama knew them. So it was, you know, they knew me, and so they would usually let me buy her cigarettes. Now I think that's just really corrupt to ask your children to get your drugs for you, but anyway. This was the 60s. So, you know, get back on there, yeah. So, you know, things were a lot different back then. We couldn't tape things. Star Trek started in 1966 on my birthday, September 22nd. I will never forget. We used to watch it, and my sister, from the very first episode, would sit there with a little portable tape recorder that my dad had. Now, portable, the definition of portable in the 60s is a lot different than nowadays. This thing took D-size batteries, okay? And it was heavy. It took 4 of them. And there was no way to plug it in. It did not come with an adapter, like most things come nowadays. It took 3-inch reel-to-reel tape. And those tapes were about $1.25 a piece. They were pretty expensive by 60s and 70s prices, so we didn't have many tapes. So she would sit there with the microphone, holding it up to the speaker of our mono television. Not many people had stereo televisions in those days. We had a little Sears color set that we got in 1965, and it was a tiny 14-inch diagonal screen. So this was our family television set that I grew up with. And it was a metal black box, basically, with legs. And so my sister would sit there and hold that microphone up, and we didn't dare make a sound. We wanted a good recording. And a battery-powered tape recorder does not do a good job. I mean, it would get to a certain point in the tape, and it'd be like da 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 da, and so you had the, oh dear, it was not the best thing to listen to, for sure. For sure. But we would record it every week and play back the audio tape, because that's what recording was in the 60s. There were no, there weren't even Betamaxes. I mean, there was no way to record the video coming off the TV. There was just, you could record on the little tape recorder. So we would record so many episodes, and we would listen to them because we were hungry for Star Trek. And we would, you know, then erase those tapes and reuse them because we couldn't afford that many tapes. And with my allowance, I would buy more tapes, and my sister could record more, and we could keep them. I guess I figured with my little allowance that someday we'd have enough tapes that we could just tape the whole season at once. And no, we never had that many tapes. So we'd have, you know, enough for about 6 weeks worth. And we put up with the noises from the tape getting caught in the heads, and, you know, because the tape's like 1/4 of an inch, right? And you have to thread it through these read-write heads, right? So, you know, you're trying to, oh dear, 3 minutes. I'm trying, guys, I'm trying for the team. Oh, if I could just get more points. Get back in there. Oh. The trick of drifting is to not go out of the zone and try to not reduce your speed going around curves because you slide more. Drifting is sliding in a forward direction, sideways. It sounds easy. It's easy to put a car in a skid. It's not easy to control which way it goes once you do so. So I have a lot of respect for drifters. I'm not a very good drifter, but here we go. So I rambled on about the 60s and about the civil rights movement and, oh gosh. Oh, let's rewind. Maybe I can catch it before it fails me. But in so many ways, I've seen a lot of injustice in my 62 years. I lived through the assassination of Martin Luther King, who was a great man. And Mama always said that he knew he was going to die because he had that fear in his eyes. Well, wouldn't you? People were burning crosses in your yard? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I would be terrified. He had a lot of death threats. A lot of stuff that probably nobody but his close family knows about. Although they said a lot, but I bet there are a lot of untold stories about Martin Luther King and how brave he was. You know, I think about him every time I talk to one of my black friends. And I wish that my black friends lived in a world, in a country, where they felt welcomed and valued as a person. And it makes me sad to hear them talk about the many ways that they are persecuted. And yes, I think that in schools, oh, well, we tried. We didn't have enough. Didn't have enough people this time. But, you know, we really need to be kinder and gentler. Whenever I see a black person, I talk to them and I try to be extra nice because I know there's a lot of white people here in my area who don't treat them nice. When I started work at Georgia State University in 1990, they had a 2-day multicultural orientation. Now, you hear a lot of talk about race, what do they call it? Basic race, something where a lot of legislators are saying, oh, we don't want this race education. We don't want any talk of race. And I'm going, what the heck? Because I had this 2-day multicultural orientation. It wasn't called the same thing, but basically it was education about race and about how people are persecuted. And there was a lot of stuff in there about, okay, if you've got the average Hispanic person, for example, they value their husband kind of more than their parents and their kids. I mean, they love their parents and kids fiercely, don't get me wrong, but basically their value is the present. So they put more emphasis on the present. They've done studies with Hispanic people, Oriental people like Japanese, Chinese, and with Americans. And they found out that if you give them an ethnic problem, you've got only so many people can be in a boat. And for all of you to survive, you have to choose a person to throw overboard. And a lot of people say, well, I wouldn't throw any of them overboard. I'd jump overboard. But you're not given that choice in this ethnic problem. You have to make a choice. And under those circumstances, they found that most Hispanics would, keep the husband. If they had to choose between their husband, an elderly parent, and a child, they would choose to save the husband. Oriental people will usually choose to save the parent, and a person from the United States would mostly choose the child to save. This was a very famous study, and it's been quoted a lot in a lot of different venues. So, in multicultural orientation, we learned that this is a cultural thing, and it's not wrong, it's just different. There were a lot of other things. There was a Brazilian girl in there, and she said she was so sick of American men asking her to wear a swimsuit and be promiscuous. And she said, I'm a good Catholic girl. I would never do that. So stereotypes can be very harmful. The whole thrust of the class was to think about that if you're black, it's harder for you to get up in the morning and go to work because off the bat, you're going to have some persecution going on. If you're a white person, you don't have that. You don't have to worry about somebody, throwing off on you because of the color of your skin. You're white, so you've got white privilege. But if you're a person of color, you've got that to deal with as well as whatever is going on in your life. And, of course, they have the regular things going on in their lives like you and I, if you're white. And if you're black, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not as easy for a person of color or a person of a certain ethnic group or a person who is an immigrant to go through their day and work. So, you need to be kinder and gentler to everybody. When I worked at Georgia State University, and when I, in fact, went there in 1977, we had students from 40-something countries. When I was going to BYU and we moved to Utah, my daughter was in a school with students from 65 different countries. I've had experiences that a lot of people haven't had. I've had a lot of contact with people from very different backgrounds, very different ways of looking at things, very different, stuff. I'll never forget my friend from the Netherlands. She we came out of church and we had sang some patriotic songs and stuff like that. And she says, "I'm afraid that your country is getting very nationalist." And I turned around and looked at her, and nationalist? Us? I just didn't see that. But she said, "The way that y'all talk about freedom and the flag and democracy, we don't talk that way in Europe. We don't differentiate between the countries that way." And here I am, I'm stuck, so I'm gonna go to the map and quick travel someplace. But, we have a very different way of looking at things. I was still friends with her after that. And I asked her more questions about it. And after 9/11, she says, "Now you know what we've been going through in Europe for years." And I'm like, wow. Because I never really realized that it was different in Europe. But there's a lot of bombings in cafes, for example, and things like that, that we don't have that much of that here. We have terrorist acts, certainly, and more so since 9/11. But 9/11, I will never forget how I felt. I was sitting in a doctor's office. I had an appointment. And somebody turned the TV on and said, "Oh my, look at this." And the first plane had hit the first tower. And as I sat there just watching that, just not believing what I'm seeing in our own country, I will never forget how it felt that day to be sitting there watching that. And I couldn't stop watching it. I couldn't wait to get home and turn on the TV. And then I realized I was watching CNN, and they said, "If you've got young children, maybe you shouldn't watch all of our coverage." And then I started, then my mind got in gear, and I'm like, oh, they are absolutely right. So I limited what we watched. But, oh my goodness. The things that you lived through, and you don't think that things are going to change the way you look at things in the future. But the way we look at people from the Middle East, for example, most people from the Middle East are peaceful people. They're not going to pick trouble. They're not going to be terrorists. But that's what we think. Oh, terrorists, because of those Arabic people that bombed the United States. Well, I mean, come on. Every Arabic person is not Al-Qaeda or ISIS or whatever it evolves into. These are not all Muslims either. When I worked in Utah, University of Utah Library, I knew a lot of people from different nationalities. I knew a lady from Iran. I knew a gentleman from Japan. I knew a lot of people from different countries, different backgrounds, because a lot of them were going to school at University of Utah. A lot of them weren't. But we served the students of the University of Utah. And so we saw a hearty mix of America. And, it does change your attitude if you're around a lot of people from different ethnic groups. It does change your mind about a lot of things. I was always very open-minded. Even as a kid, I really took to heart all the world news we were studying, and studying why Israel and Arabs were at each other's throats, and why Vietnamese were still not free even after we went over there and fought a war with them and for 'em. You know, I couldn't understand a lot of our wars and why we did that. And, you know, part of me wants to just say, you know, we shouldn't be going over there and fighting foreign wars, but I think about a lot of the troops establishing schools in Iran and, you know, doing good things for the people of Iran. And I thought, well, that's good. That's good that we were doing that. It worries me that we tend to think so shallowly about our fellow human beings. We tend to judge them, snap judgments. Oh, somebody's wearing one of those little caps on their heads. They're odd, or whatever. They're peculiar. But do we ever stop and talk to them? When I was a Girl Scout leader back in 1987, my daughter was, you know, I wanted her to have a Girl Scout troop, and they said, well, if you want your daughter to be in Girl Scouts, you need to consider being a leader because there's not a troop in your area. Well, I learned to be a Girl Scout leader, and I never regretted it. I decided I wanted a multicultural troop. I had no idea how I was going to find girls, period. But I happened to find a Jewish girl, a black girl, an Iranian girl, no, Iraqi, and my best friend's 2 children, who were like me, white, and, you know. And so I had a chance to get to know these sweet little girls. And they had no biases at all. They loved each other. They were kindergarten age. They hadn't learned any cultural stuff from their parents. I mean, you know, my best friend was like me. She loved everybody. And she didn't care if they were black, Hispanic, Iraqi, whatever. She, you know, she was a little nervous about the Iraqi girl's family until I told her more about their story. This family, I met them when my little girl was playing with their little girl at the Dunkin' Donuts, and I realized that the baker was her dad and her mom was not there. He took her to work with him, to be with her. And I thought that was neat, and it was shortly before the store was going to close. So we were there pretty late. We had a habit of going out for donuts in the evening. My daughter was out of school. You know, we were, well, actually, she was in school. We were, you know, not trying to mess with her bedtime, but, you know, she was an older student. Wait a minute, she was 5. She wasn't an older student. I can't explain why we were there. I think it was a Saturday night. It was a Saturday night. And I said to the little girl, would you like to be in Girl Scouts with my daughter? And she says, well, I'll have to ask my parents. And I said, is your mom here? And she brought out her dad, who was the baker. And I explained to him what I wanted to do. And he says, oh, we cannot do that. We have no car. And I said, that's okay. I can pick her up. And his face just brightened. And he said, you would be willing to pick her up and take her to the meetings? I said, sure. Because I'd been without a car. I knew what that was like. So, yeah, I was willing to do that. And so he took me home to meet his wife. And so that was on a different time. And I talked to both of them. And I asked them, you know, how did you come to the United States? And they told me their story. They lived in Iraq and were persecuted because of their beliefs. And suffice it to say that they were devout Muslims. But Muslims of their particular sect didn't believe in women working or having an education. His wife was highly educated. She had a master's degree, and he did too. Because of the United States relations with Iran, when they came over here, they could not get the records of their schooling. So he was working as a baker at the Dunkin' Donuts, and she didn't speak enough English to be able to work. So they were trying to make it as a family, with him working many hours at the Dunkin' Donuts. And I'm like, oh my, how little I know about refugees and what they go through. They came here seeking asylum, and they wanted to get surgery for their little girl's eyes. She had crossed eyes, and she had some joint problems. And so they, at two, escaped Iraq over the mountains into Turkey, and many of the people that came with them lost fingers and toes to frostbite. It's horrible to think about. You know, you've got a 2-year-old with you, and many of them had children with them. And to have to go into such a cold environment with only the clothes on your back, it's awful to think that, you know, they went through all that and they ended up in the United States. And of course we had the war with Iraq. And so everybody was looking down on them and thinking terrorists, you know, because we had the Gulf War. And these people weren't terrorists. They were gentle people. They were devout Muslims. And Muslims, if you study their religion, they are very peaceful people. The people who knocked down our Twin Towers in 9/11 were not regular Muslims. They were an extremist sect. We have extremists too in our churches. Consider there's a Baptist church in Texas that every time a person who's a member of the LGBTQ plus community, they die, they go to their funerals and harass the people mourning. I think that's not Christian behavior. I think that's awful. So, you know, I'm a Christian, but I sure don't believe like that. So why should we think that all Muslims are the same and they're all terrorists? It's not true. Only a very few Muslims are actually terrorists and believe that infidels should be killed, and, you know. And a lot of their beliefs are false beliefs according to their religious leaders. So, you know, the whole holy war concept is really not the Muslim religion. And so we persecute Muslims. We don't let them pray 5 times a day, which is one of the behaviors that is deeply ingrained in their culture. You know, I think it's cruel for us Christians not to be able to pray before a test at school. You know, I would say a silent prayer, but I thought it was nutso that because of all that happened in the 60s to take religion out of the schools, we still had a devotional every morning, and I loved it. But I can see where that might be construed as persecution. When I was 14, everybody at my school was pulling me in a different religion. You know, they were trying to get me to go to their church. And some of them were Church of God, some of them were Baptists. They were different flavors of Baptist. Some were other kinds of evangelical churches, and I felt like I was being persecuted, man. I didn't want to go to any of them because they didn't believe what I believed. And I couldn't really define my religion, and because of that, I was kind of isolated in high school, junior high. Senior high, people left me alone, which I was grateful for, but junior high, and they meant well. They cared about whether my soul was saved or not, but I really didn't want to hear a preacher get up there and yell and tell me I was going to the bad place and stuff like that. In my church, we don't do that. And why is it considered okay to have a preacher yell at you and say that you're bad, not even knowing you personally? Just telling the whole congregation you're gonna go to the bad place if you don't follow the 10 Commandments. I believe in the 10 Commandments, absolutely. But why should you yell at people if you're giving a glad message that Jesus loves everybody and that, yes, you should follow the 10 Commandments, but not out of fear, because you want to. Because you love him, So, yeah, I've experienced several kinds of persecution in my life, even though I'm white. And it's nothing like what black people and Hispanic people go through every day. I'm not comparing myself to others. I'm just saying that I've experienced some of these things, and it was not pleasant. We need to come together as a country. We need to quit getting in these camps and saying, oh, why should we spend all this government money on the poor? And, why should we give rights? Black people have enough rights. Why do we need to give them more? And I say to that, we have been denying opportunities to black people since way before the 60s. And it's time to recognize that black people can learn just as well as white people. And they can do great things. And why do we prevent anybody from contributing to society? All of us suffer. My radical idea for public school would be to teach kids to get along with each other before the age of 10. I read a study a long time ago on the Department of Education website. I went back a couple of years ago and tried to find that study, and I couldn't find it. Apparently it had been removed. But that study said that children before the age of 10 really aren't going to learn as much in school as a student 10 or above. So 10 is the jumping off point for a kid's education. So instead of teaching them the same thing over and over, year after year after year, like we do with math, why don't we wait until they're ready to learn before cramming their little heads full of facts? When any child psychologist will tell you that the main purpose of daycare and kindergarten is socialization. You teach kids to get along with each other, to stand in lines and to mind the teacher, and pretty much how to be peaceable. But we don't teach these things. We cram the preschoolers full of colors, shapes, numbers, and things that they don't really need right now. They need socialization. They need to learn not to pull each other's hair. They need to learn how to talk their problems out instead of raising the fists. They need to learn how to treat each other politely, how to apologize when they've done something wrong. They need to learn how to just generally work in groups and wait their turn at things and share their crayons. These are things that are being put in the back seat because we want to make rocket scientists out of our babies. Well, that's not going to help them as much as a simple grounding in the basic how to get along with your peers stuff. So my radical plan for elementary school would be to pull them all out of class, 3rd grade and below. Put them in the auditorium in groups according to age and teach them to get along with each other, to share their crayons, have them do fun things that they enjoy. Let them think of school as fun and play. And, you know, you can teach them random facts. That's not, you know, unreasonable, but have them in groups working together and tell them something to draw a picture of and let them work together to see what they want. You know, teach them to be individuals, not to just do what everybody else is doing, but teach them, you know, if you have a problem with somebody, don't hit them, don't spit on them or bite them. Sit down and talk about, you know, I want to use that crayon and you're using it and you're not giving it to me. And, you know, they might say, well, I'm not through with it. But have them talk to each other and suggest ways that they might, you know, or maybe another kid says, well, if that's a problem, here, I've got that color crayon, you can use it. You know, they learn to solve their own problems if they are taught to sit down and talk about it. And that's something that even our teenagers, you know, tend to get hot-headed and get into fights. You know, they need to learn how to communicate in healthy ways. Not name-calling, not cussing. They need to learn to be civil and to be good citizens. And how are we going to teach that if we don't make it a priority in our public schools? Just saying. I think that they ought to, you know, put a lot of energy into groups and working things out and sharing of ideas. Not that I'm trying to confuse people, you know, I don't want, as a Christian mom, I don't want my kid to become a Muslim because they've got Muslim friends at school. I want them to be a Christian like me. But I shouldn't feel threatened if they want to learn about Muslim religion, or if they want to kneel and pray with their friends who are Muslim, why not? That's not a threat to my Christian education of my child. It may be a little confusing, but, you know, you can sit down with your child and say, yeah, you're learning about other religions and this is a good thing, but we are ex-religion and this is how we believe. And you shouldn't go forcing our beliefs on the little Muslim child, but you can learn together. If your Jewish friend is a boy and he's wearing a hat inside, we're taught not to wear hats inside, but we are Christians. That the Jewish believe that it's not proper to have your head uncovered inside. Or a Muslim woman will wear that piece of clothing covering her head, and some Muslim women believe in doing that, and some, once they come to the U.S., quit doing that. And That's personal choice. So kids are going to have questions, but that's okay. What we need to do is just explain, well, that's their culture, and this is our culture. And give children a chance to be exposed to other ideas and cultures. Not to confuse them, but just to teach them that there's a lot of room for different beliefs in the world. We shouldn't be wanting to kill each other. We should be wanting to help each other and understand and talk. So, I've been going on and on and on, and I hope I haven't bored you, but I'm really upset tonight. I don't know where I'm going to be living next month, and this is a very unsettling feeling. I'm just waiting to hear from the prospective landlord. We are trying to get in touch with the new landlord to find out what they want. And, I wrote her or him a little letter and said, I'm 62 years old, I'm on fixed income, my daughter's looking for work, I don't know what we're going to do. I hope you're not going to go up on the rent. And I don't know, they may just say, I don't care. It's really going to come down to their political views and their, But at least I can put our story out there and make us more than just a number on a piece of paper. We're real people. And we're really scared. So every time I think about, these crises happen every few years, when you rent, you always have that fear of what if I can't pay the rent? And you have half of all homeless people, they're working and they can't pay the rent. And that's why they're on the street. And I'm scared to death of being one of those people on the street. It's easier to think, people who are homeless, they're lazy, they're no good people, they're up to no good, they don't want to have an address because the police can't find them. Well, there's a few like that. There's some in every group. There's people living in fancy houses who are crooks. Come on. Just because somebody's living on the street doesn't mean that they're one of those, chronic criminals. The people on the street, half of them are mentally ill. Reagan did this. He pushed in the 80s for Congress to, pass some bills to do away with mental institutions. They treat people horribly in there. We should do away with them. Well, they passed the legislation to get rid of the mental institutions. But what they didn't do was pass the legislation that would have provided community support. And there was such opposition to having group homes, not in my neighborhood, NIMBY, all over the place. So you've got this population of the homeless who really belongs in a mental institution, but there are no mental institutions. What do we have? Mental health jails. Really, come on. We have jail hospitals where criminals who are aging are treated for terminal diseases. If somebody is that sick, should they be in jail? No matter what they've done, they're not going to commit any crimes now if they're dying. Why do we incarcerate so much? Why are we so adamant that, these people belong in jail, they're criminals? Well, no. I disagree with that. We incarcerate more people than communist China. Now what does that say about us as a country? It's not a very pretty picture, is it? And we have 2 million people in jail. A lot of them are black. Black people are 16% of our country, and yet they make up most of the people in jail. I think that a lot of black people are arrested for things that white people did, and they're blaming it on the black people because they're white racist. There are some black people who have done horrible things, but there are some white people who have done horrible things too. You can't tell me that it's a product of race. I believe that if you single out a group of people and you tell them they're bad enough, they might start thinking, because low self-esteem does bad things to people's psyches. So, you might have a population of people who go out and do bad things because they believe no matter what they do, nobody's going to like them. And I think that's how a lot of people, black and white, end up as career criminals, because they don't think enough of themselves to value human life, period. But I think these guys are in the minority. I think most of the people sitting in prison are there because of mishandled cases and just plain scapegoating. It's very easy to frame somebody for a serious crime, and there are plenty of examples of people who have been in jail for 20, 30 years, and then all of a sudden DNA proves them innocent. And here they've been sitting in jail, and they've got a jail record, and when they come out, they can't get jobs because nobody wants to hire a former felon. Why can't we, if somebody has paid their debt to society, why do we have to hold it against them for the rest of their lives? Or why do we have to lock up people for the rest of their lives when maybe what they did wasn't that bad? I'm talking about the issue of drug abuse. If you count 4 people, one of them is addicted. Now, are we going to say that 3/4 of the country are bad people and they should be locked up forever? I don't think so. I don't think it's a moral question of whether somebody has strong enough morals to stay away from drugs. I think that's a fallacy. I think that's something that certain groups have dreamed up to criminalize people. There are a lot of disabled people sitting in jail. If we had mental health institutions to put them in instead of jails, it would cost less. And our taxpayer money is building those jails, by the way. If you pay your taxes are being used for various purposes. You should think about, do you want your tax money going into mental health prisons where that's a fallacy? They don't really get mental health care there. They're just sitting there locked away.
Okay, sis. Plotting your route to the Fort Savant live event now. Turn
How
around
long should
when
we
it is safe
punish
to do
people
so.
for? If they did a crime when they're 16 and they're in their 50s now, should we still be punishing them? It depends on what they did, I suppose, but,
In 400 meters,
are we going to
turn right.
rehabilitate, or are we just going to lock people up and throw away the key? And I think in many ways we are locking people up and throwing away the key. Most people don't think about being incarcerated unless they know a loved one that's in prison.
Recalculating
And a
route.
lot of lives have been ruined when somebody's been put in prison. So we should think about, there's one thing to get revenge on somebody because, he stole whatever, or he
Turn
did
around
drugs
when
and
it
so
is
he's a
safe to
bad
do so.
person. Well, in Europe, they don't see addiction the same way we do in the United States. They'll hold jobs hoping for people. They'll say, listen,
In 200 meters,
I've
turn
seen
right.
that you are drunk on the job a lot. you need to go into treatment. And I won't say anything, and you can come back and your job will still be here. And they just treat it as a normal thing, a medical problem, which is what addiction is. It's a genetic problem. It is a medical problem. It needs treatment, but yet only the rich can afford drug treatment. And if you've been addicted to drugs, you don't have money. Unless you've got a rich relative that can put you through the treatment, how are you going to get treatment? It all goes back to, there are so many things that are injustices in our country. Shouldn't we be treating medical problems instead of just saying, oh, the person's morally weak, you can't stay away from the bottle? It's like, what? You know, if you haven't been addicted, you haven't craved anything, which I haven't, it's very hard for me to picture what that's like for somebody who's addicted. But I do write science fiction, and I do write about addicts. I've done a lot of research into how miserable it is and how hard it is for somebody who's addicted to stay away from this stuff. And it takes a lot of looking at underlying causes. People don't just decide, oh, hey, I'm going to have fun. Oh, I'm addicted.
Turn right.
Usually, it's deeper than that. It's problems going on that they seek their solutions in a bottle. And that's not the way to go about it. And they know it. But yet, here they are, you know, struggling to get clean, and basically everybody says 12-step programs. Well, I did a little research on that. I've got a friend who's addicted, and I was trying to understand him better. And he was saying, I don't want to go to any 12-step programs. And even I was taking a 6-week mental health thing with the therapist for 6 weeks, short term, doing cognitive behavior therapy. And I was looking that up as far as addiction to see if it might help my friend. And I found out some very interesting things. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a set of exercises meant to get a person looking inwards and trying to figure out, well, why am I doing this behavior? I'm not happy with my behavior. I want to change it. And it's a way of systematically looking at the things that are not going well in your life, and some of it is common sense things like getting enough sleep, getting some exercise, losing weight if you need to, but not really specific goals like that. You have to set your own goals. Oh gosh, I gotta get to Forzathon. All right, let's get there and participate. But, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy works for a lot of different conditions, and it helped me in that 6 weeks. And I was looking at the research, and I'm not one to read something
Round one,
and
started!
In 100 meters, turn right.
like, I don't just read something in a popular magazine
Turn around
and
when it is safe to do so.
and say, oh, that's interesting. I go try to find the study that the
100
article
meters.
is based on
Turn
and
left.
read it, if I can get a hold of it, or I at least read the synopsis and learn a little bit about it. I have
200
28
meters,
hours in the
turn
behavioral
left.
sciences. So, you know, other
Turn
words,
left.
I've had a couple of mental health courses. I've had child development. I've had theories of personality. I've had abnormal psychology. So I've had a little bit of training in psychology. I'm not a therapist by any stretch of the imagination, but I have an interest in psychology, and I know how to read the literature. I'm a little familiar with the jargon. So
In
I
200 meters,
really
turn
look
right.
at,
Turn right.
you know, okay, what is the study all about? What was the researcher trying to do? How is it misinterpreted by the news media, which happens a lot, because they're not scientists, and they maybe haven't had the coursework that I've had. So, you know, I try to look at things in depth. I have to. I'm a writer. I'm a science fiction writer, so I have to be able to read science, right? So if I'm coming up with a theory, I've got to think about, okay, is this plausible, reasonable? You know, could it happen in real life? So I've got to know a lot to write science fiction. It's not for the faint-hearted. You have to be accurate in your research, and you have to be a little bit of a crystal ball maniac to try to figure, okay, what would things be like in the future if we had this piece of technology or whatever. So, yeah, I come from that kind of
when it is
background.
safe to do
And
so.
my...
Round 1 complete. Get to round 2.
Okay. Yay, we got through round 1. But, so, I look at things. When I say I do research, scholarly research, mind you. I do not just casually read and say, oh, that's nice. I want to know more. So I usually go to studies to get my information. I look at the research and see if I agree with the conclusions they came to. You know, that sort of technical reading. So I looked at addiction. Do you know that there is no scientific research that backs up the 12-step method for addiction? And yet, the psychologist that
Turn
I was
around
doing
when it is safe to
the
do so.
course with said, oh, 12-step is the best thing we have for addicts. Well, no, it's not. There's not even any scientific evidence that it works. Why? Because there are so many programs that use the 12-step method, but basically it's so different. It's like comparing apples and oranges. You can't really go in as a researcher and do scientific studies on it because it is so different for every person. So the mere adaptability of the program makes it almost impossible to study scientifically because you can't separate what works and what doesn't by the methods. So there are other methods to treat addiction. And a lot of the drug treatment we do uses the 12-step method, so we're destined to fail because it can't really be scientifically proven. That doesn't mean that 12-step is a waste of time. It does work for some people, but they have not learned what makes addiction therapy useful and have it work more often than just every once in a while. So, you know, we need to take another look at addiction and how we treat it in this country. And people worldwide are looking at the issues and trying different things.
Turn around when it is safe to do so.
But a universally accepted thing is that putting people in prison because they have a small amount of illegal drugs, it really doesn't rehabilitate them. There are so many people that...
Round 2 complete. Get to round 3.
Right, the danger sign. Which danger
Turn
sign?
around when it is
Apparently
safe
it's
to
not
do
the
so.
windmill this time. Or maybe I'm just not paying attention. Maybe it is a windmill. But you want to... It's human nature to want to simplify things. Oh, it is the windmill. Okay. I was hoping it wasn't. And I hit it. Whoa, I did. Yay! But, you know, we need to look at other ways to handle addiction than putting people in jail, because jail really doesn't rehabilitate people. People who are incarcerated for a long time, a lot of times they are right back in jail. We don't have a good, we don't have a good rate of helping people with addiction. And jail doesn't really help them with that.
Yeah, because there are...
This is crazy. We're disconnected. Oh, come on now. Come on, don't do this. Don't do this. Ah, my controller is not working. Ah, is it unplugged? My tech support staff will help me.
Give me a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
See what's going on here. Yeah. What is going on here? What is it? What? Why did my controller die? Well, anyway, it's 11:08. I have gone on a lot longer than I expected to. I've been talking about all sorts of things. But, all right. But basically, let me pick somewhere in fast travel. Maybe I can get out of the tree. But, you know, everything is connected. Incarceration, the homeless, mental health, the lack of health care, disability. It's all connected. All social issues connect at a certain point. And until we learn to actually rehabilitate our criminals, until we learn to be tolerant of addiction and consider it a medical problem,
Turn right.
until we quit seeing disabled people as a burden on the economy and instead think that, 1 out of 5 people in our country is disabled, we need to do something to allow them to work. Do you know that OSHA killed my ability to work? I have B positive blood. They have found out during COVID that people with A and B blood are actually deficient in immune system compared to people with AB or O blood. If you don't know your blood type, you ought to go have it checked. It's as simple as giving blood at the Red Cross. They'll tell you what your blood type is. Mama, I was interested in...
Congratulations!
Mama was in the hospital getting some tests, and she just asked them to give me a blood test because I was curious as to what my blood type was, and she was curious too. She says as a nurse that's a good thing to know. So she paid for me a blood test. Back then it wasn't that expensive. It was the 60s. But, because of my blood type, I have struggled to keep jobs because of the attendance thing. I'm not a drug addict. I never have been, but people were looking at me being absent a lot on Fridays and Mondays and thinking, oh, she's addicted to drugs. There's a stigma attached to that. We shouldn't be looking at our people that way. And if somebody's addicted, we shouldn't be saying, oh, addicts are terrible people. We ought to put them in jail and just not have to deal with it. Well, that's essentially what we're doing, and it's not working. It does not help anybody to be sitting in jail because of addiction. And people do things while they're addicted. They steal. You know, I can't imagine the suffering it is to be addicted to something, but, you know, they're not in their right mind when they're stealing things to get more drugs. I mean, you know, does it mean they're a bad person because they steal to get drugs? I've never been addicted. I don't know what they go through. But why do we throw them in jail and throw away the key, basically? Why do we make it so hard for people who have served their debt to society? They've done the sentence that the judge has put, and they don't know how to live without being told what to do. They get brainwashed in jail. I think it's crazy. I think that we should be having true rehabilitation going on in jail. We shouldn't be just making people non-citizens because of something they did maybe when they were teenage, when hormones were high, and maybe they wouldn't do that after they get older. We try so many children as adults. Why do we have this trend of trying children as adults? We want to use harsher and harsher penalties, but we found out in the 80s, with all these harsh penalties, crime may have gone down, but it wasn't because of incarceration. There were other factors at play. Every time the crime rate goes up, politicians get in there, oh, we need stronger laws. We don't need stronger laws. We need to have less confusing laws. We need to be more compassionate. We need to look at our laws that are on the books, some of which are obsolete, and we need to say, you know, do we really need this law on the books anymore? We need to simplify the law. I'm not advocating that we let murderers, rapists, and robbers out on the street. No. Serious crime and repeated crime, you know, that's something that is a different issue altogether. Most of the people in jail didn't murder, didn't commit a felony, didn't beat somebody nearly to death. It's white-collar crimes. They did fraud, they did something dishonest, or maybe they got blamed for something they didn't even do. And in the case of race or disability, you know, you're talking a lot more people sitting in jail than need to be. So we need to be kinder and gentler as a society. We need to work towards world peace, and that starts right here in our country. We need not to look at people from other countries as less than human beings, or, you know, or because somebody comes from a certain country or because they have a certain culture. We need not to be judging. Do you know that when a person comes to this country to seek amnesty, they have gone through an average of 5 years of inquiry by various countries' governments, interrogations, and, you know, all this stuff. why then do we have this preconception that, oh, refugees are evil, they are going to come here and pillage and rob, and, you know, these people have already been vetted for 5 years. Why are we scared of them? Why do we think that, oh, I don't want them working in our fast food on the corner? You know, you don't even know them. How can you judge them and say they're bad people when they've already gone through 5 years of vetting and passed, and yet we want them to go through 5 more years in our country? It's like, that doesn't make sense. You know, if somebody's a bad person, they're going to have some record of wrongdoing that they've done, and they're going to be found out by some country. I mean, over and over again, it's the same process. And somewhere in New York City at the UN, there is a committee that are given what look like baseball cards. Basically, each one is an immigrant trying to get access to amnesty in whatever country. And every country is expected to take their share of these cards. So they look through the cards and they pick the people to come to their country. And this takes place for millions of immigrants every year. It's a worldwide effort. It's an international effort to save people that are going to be killed in their home country if they don't find a home in another country. And most of them, sadly, don't even make it to that table to be a baseball card, to be traded between country representatives. It makes me sad. Because if I was running from bad people that wanted to kill me and my family and my children, I would do anything. Some of these people risk death in a million different ways getting to our country. And then they get to our borders and they're not let into our borders because we have this phobia of people from other countries. They're not like us. They believe different things. They're going to murder, rob, and rape our children. It's like, no. These people that are refugees seeking asylum, they have been vetted. They've been investigated. They're not terrorists. But we want to believe that everybody Arab is a terrorist. We want to believe that everybody from Iraq must be a bad person. It's just not true. And why should we persecute these people more than they've already been persecuted? You know, why can't we have some compassion and let them in our country? We don't have enough workers. I don't know if you've heard about the latest studies, but we're not having enough children born in the United States. Our workforce is aging, and we're devastated after COVID. So many people have died. A lot of people have left the workforce. A lot of women have left the workforce because of having to school their children virtually, and they're wanting to make virtual education go away. But a lot of black parents don't want to send their kids back to school because they actually got a break from the persecution. You know, I think there should be both. And really, this COVID epidemic is not going to be the first epidemic to hit our country. There are going to be many pandemics because we are a global international society and we are going to spread disease. And it's going to happen again and again and again. Why don't we keep the procedures that we put in place for COVID and not overcrowd our schools? Schools are breeding grounds for all sorts of infectious diseases. Any institution is. As a person with B positive blood, I caught every cold. You know, people will say it's just a cold, I'll go to work. I caught every cold, and for me it was like flu, because I have fibromyalgia. I have more pain than most people, and I have constant pain that never goes away. It's like teeth gritting sometimes. Right now it's about a 6 out of 10. That's a low point. Sometimes, well, most days, it's like an 8. An 8 is like, but I'm not going to show that. It's chronic pain. I just deal with it. You're probably saying, well, why don't you take pain medicine for that if it's that bad? Well, I was on pain medicine for many years. I didn't like what it did to me. I think better without it. All pain medicine has side effects. So I distract myself. I play video games. I do things to get my mind off the pain. I'm constantly doing something to occupy my mind, whether it's writing science fiction, whether it's designing book covers, whether it's playing addictive amounts of Horizon 4. I find ways to keep my mind busy so that I'm not thinking about how much pain I'm in. Because if you think about it, it'll drive you crazy. It will. So, I'm just another disabled person. But I see so much injustice in the world. And I'm experiencing that injustice because my home has been sold out from under me. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay the rent. So, there's only so much I can do about it. I've written the old management, try to get a refund because I paid 2 months on my rent instead of 1 in May. Now I don't know if I'll get June back. And I have to pay this new landlord now. So, yeah, we're in a pickle. That cuts my buffer in half. And I have to spend that buffer anyway soon because Medicaid is going to get on my back. You can't have savings if you're on Medicaid. You will lose your Medicaid. So whatever windfall you get, you have 9 months to get rid of that or you lose your Medicaid. If I lose my Medicaid, I can't afford to go to the doctor, and I've got all kinds of medical problems that need medicine. I can't afford my medicine if I don't have Medicaid. So I am... I don't have to worry about losing my Social Security anymore because now it's old people's Social Security. But when it was disability, I constantly lived in fear that somebody would wrongly accuse me of faking, and then where would I be? Without income, trying to raise my daughter. When I got my windfall, I fought 4 years to get disability. And let me let you in on a little secret. Social Security doesn't believe in fibromyalgia. It doesn't believe that it's they have the belief that if you're disabled every day. Well, I think a lot of disabled people will tell you that it's different every day. Some days are worse than others. Fibromyalgia is one of those conditions. There's really no medical test that they can give you. There is no test for pain. You basically have the little signs with the smiley and frowny faces that you encounter at the doctor, and you point at which picture fits you right now. And I tend to underreport my pain. I really don't like admitting weakness, and it's very hard for me to admit how much pain I'm in. So I tend to say, oh, I'm fine. I'm not fine. Today I am not fine. I am like a raving lunatic because I am scared to death of what's going to happen. And I'm scared of how our country is going. I'm afraid of losing my Social Security because of people who say, well, nobody should get Social Security. It's a waste of taxpayer money. Well, look at the Congress that spent what money was saved up for Social Security. We should be blaming them for taking that money and putting it on the deficit. I think the deficit being, the budget being balanced and all that, that's a pipe dream. I don't believe our budget will ever be balanced. I don't believe we will ever get rid of deficits because we just aren't getting rid of it. And every Congress, we get Republicans in there, they do stuff. We get Democrats in there, they're trying to reverse everything the Republicans did. We get Republicans in there and they try to undo what the Democrats did. We do not have a functional government, in my opinion. We need to sit down and quit arguing between our two-party system. We need to come to common ground. And this Congress that we've got now, all they want to do is argue. I'm sick of all the arguing. I'm caught in the middle here. I have a government official whom was elected, not my choice, from my district, who goes out and embarrasses all of us. And she has a lot of followers that think she's great, but I don't think she's great. I think she's a fool. And I think she should be kicked out of Congress. But what do I know? I'm a disabled person sitting here playing a video game, But sometimes I feel absolutely disenfranchised and voiceless because I see so much injustice in my country and I can't do anything. And they're wanting to take away my voting rights. I don't want to have to go to a polling place and be exposed to 50 infectious diseases. I want to be able to vote from home, and I don't want to have to prove my identity. Why can't they just go into the Georgia Department of Motor Vehicle database and get that information? To know who I am, to know I'm not defrauding the voting system. Why can't we have more vote by mail? I think it's a good idea, and I don't think there's widespread fraud going on. Just because one person repeats the lie again and again with no evidence to back it up, and a bunch of people believe him because that's how you get a lie believed. You just repeat it all. But this is my mood tonight. I'm just in panic mode. And I've been rambling on and on. So, folks, I'm going to let it rest. And thank you for hanging in there with me. Lateraling, thank you for being with me. And anybody who might watch my tape after I get it on YouTube or from Twitch, welcome and thank you for being part of my live stream, and forgive me for getting on my soapbox for the whole time tonight, but it's very upsetting when you rent and the rug has been pulled out from under you, and I'm just scared, and I'm probably going to be talking about this all this week until I find out something. So this is Granny Handicap, just one handicapped person and her worldview. And I hope that a lot of you will join me. I want to build a community of handicapped people. And I want people to know what handicapped people go through. Not just handicapped gamers, but people with handicaps in general. I care about people. I care about the hurt that I see on people's faces. I notice such things, and it bothers me. I hope that in my lifetime I will see some changes that will make it a kinder, better country. I have hope. I love our president. I really think he's doing a good job, and that reveals my political view right there. I'm not afraid now to voice my political views. I used to be deadly afraid of expressing controversial opinions. I'm 62. I don't care anymore. I am opinionated. And anybody who doesn't like my opinions doesn't have to watch my live stream. But I'm hoping that there are enough of you that agree with my views. And keep in mind, if you want to talk disabilities and you're a Republican, I am not going to say a word to you about my political views, okay? I want this to be a safe place for everyone, no matter what their political views, no matter what their religion, no matter what their sexual orientation. I welcome all. So if you can put up with me getting on a soapbox a while in my live streams, you are welcome. And I will not attack you for your beliefs. I will not. I will express mine, but I will not expect you not to express yours. But I don't want to talk politics on my discussions. I want to leave all that out here on my live stream and not in my discussion groups. I've got one on Discord. I've got one on Reddit. I've got a subreddit that is ADMA. Well, it's GrannyHandicap, actually. I've got my Discord is ADMA, but it's GrannyHandicap server. And I have a set of rules on there, and one of them is don't discuss religion and don't discuss politics. I don't want people flaming each other. I want it to be peaceful, exchanging ideas peacefully and diplomatically. I don't want to have it dissolve into flame wars. So I'm not going to talk politics if I get on there and type. I am not going to talk politics. And if I get on Discord, I'm not going to rant and rave like I do here. So I want it to be plain and clear that I'm trying to bring together a community, and I want everybody to be included. I do not want to exclude anybody because of their political views or because of their color, creed, religion, sexual orientation. I will not exclude anyone. I will welcome all. But I do get frustrated that, all these people are getting homeless, and the homeless problem is growing like crazy. It just makes me sad to think about all those kids. There are children in families that are trying to scrape together enough for deposits, or they can't even afford an apartment. So they are homeless because they can't afford. I think the tiny home movement is the answer to the homeless problem. I think we need enough business leaders to decide that there is room for smaller loans from banks and smaller houses, and change the local zoning ordinances to account for small spaces for people who can, you can build a tiny home out of a shipping container for like $25,000. Why can't we be allowed to do that? There are poor people that want that. There are rich people who have decided the rat race is enough. They want to live a minimalist lifestyle. They want to cut down on their things. And they want to be allowed to have tiny homes too. And I think that's wonderful. Why can't everybody be allowed who wants a tiny home to have one? Why should all these city councils and their stupid zoning laws stand in the way? Because the builders associations are so powerful politically? I don't agree with this. It's a free country. Why can't we be free to live in 125 square feet if we want to, or 88 square feet if we want to? As long as we're not living in squalor and having the danger of fires, why can't we have our own spaces that are lockable why can't every homeless person be issued one of those little carts on wheels like Elvis Summers is trying to do? If you are curious about that, you can look up on, I think it is GoFundMe that he's on. If you look up Elvis Summers, you will find where he is at. He's got a crowdfunding page, and he's trying to make little spaces that homeless people can bring around with them, so women are not getting raped and getting pregnant and losing babies on the street. It's horrible. It's heartbreaking. You know, it makes such a difference for a homeless person to have a space of their own that they can move when a policeman says, you gotta move, we don't want you here. Well, where are they gonna go? So my big thought about handicapped people tonight, since I am under threat of being homeless and scared to death of it, think about homeless people. The next time you're in a Walmart parking lot, look at the back of it. You will probably find one or two homeless people just laying on the grass snoozing or whatever. Go talk to them. There was this guy named Mark at our Walmart, and I went up and I gave him a pail with some dry milk and a washed out water bottle and some water and, you know, a couple of little things we threw in there. He told me he had an income, he didn't need it. He was one of those 50% of people that have income. He had Social Security. So he had a check coming in, but yet he could not get a cell phone because the local Best Buy didn't want him in there because he was a street person. He had the money, cash, to pay for a replacement cell phone. His got stolen. You know, and he was handicapped. He was beaten up and woke up in a hospital by another homeless person. You know, probably a mentally ill person who should be in an institution. There are a lot of those that threaten the lives of homeless people. It is not a picnic to be on the streets. So if you see a homeless person, and not necessarily the people holding up a cardboard thing, I will work for food. I don't think a lot of those are really homeless people. But, you know, talk to a homeless person. Have you ever done that? You might change your opinion of homeless people. Because most of them, through no fault of their own, they can't afford rent, so they're living on the street. And they're getting horrible diseases and not getting medical care. It is my hope that I can convince some of you to, you know, make friends with a black person, make friends with a Hispanic person, make friends with a Muslim, make friends with somebody gay, make friends with somebody who is not like you, and just see what they're like. You might change your opinion of them, of their group. Stereotypes can be very harmful. If you look for bad, you're going to find it. If you look for good, you're going to find it. I encourage you to look for good. Look for good in all people. Don't hate. And I'm going to leave you. This is Granny Handicap, aka Dennis Cole. Feeling very small and scared right now because I don't know where I'm going to be living next month. So I hope y'all will think about my situation and think about the situations of so many, many people. There are so many homeless people that don't know where their next meal's coming from. Or maybe they're able to work, maybe they're not able to work, and they're dependent on the kindness of other people. You know, and how hard it is to get disability in this country when you're told all your life, oh, if you get disabled, Social Security will be there. Maybe. It's not a given. So I hope I've given y'all some food for thought, and I hope y'all have enjoyed being here with me, and I will be here tomorrow night as usual, talking about the same old stuff and hoping somebody will listen. Y'all take care. It's a rough world out there, especially when you're handicapped, but find something in your day to brighten it. There is always good if you look for it. Granny Handicap live stream, signing off for the night. Going over to Twitch and ending the live stream now.